Hello, everyone. Welcome to Right in Front of My Face, the podcast talking about big things happening right in front of us. I'm your host, Shannon Hull, and this week is my first foray into podcast collaboration. As still a bit of a rookie podcaster, I've tried to listen to a bunch of different genres as sort of homework to learn the trade. Per usual, I am drawn to the podcast that I can learn something from, produced by truth tellers of sorts. I found the podcast Assorted Goods through Twitter, which is the motherland of podcast promotion. What I first liked was the style of tweets. Funny, but sensitive in tone, so I started to listen to the podcast. The writer and host, Dan Felton, basically writes one long-form research paper per episode and delivers it like he's talking to you over beers. He distills complicated information into palatable, understandable lessons, and I became a huge fan. A couple of months ago, Dan put out an episode in which he began speaking about his privilege and his run-ins as a Canadian white man with the police. His tone resonated, and his experience, like mine, have been with the law, resulted in some funny stories and mostly getting away with things. We couldn't relate to the experience of so many Black people marching in the streets, but he was so honest about it and his feelings so much like my own that I DM'd him to thank him for putting something so vulnerable out into the world. I appreciated his raw emotion and brutal honesty and really related to it. Then, a couple weeks later, he put out an episode about Amazon. Now, Dan, you're cutting me real deep. I currently am receiving multiple packages a week with Amazon Prime because I'm luxuriously imprisoned in my own home. I very reluctantly listened to the episode, and damn it if Dan didn't give me an education that I never wanted about tax evasion. But given that this company is almost literally in my backyard, I wanted to talk to him about it. The following episode is a Canadian man dissecting an American company right in front of my face. I hope you enjoy it. Dan, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. This is my first foray into having another podcaster on, and so it's like a really like nerdy slash fangirl slash just like interesting
I'm
opportunity.
Honored to be the first podcaster to stop by your show.
You are. So I am new to podcasting, as you and I have discussed relatively. I think I'm about 16 episodes deep into my podcasting career. So you are a seasoned veteran compared to me, but you run a podcast that I love and found through Twitter called Assorted Goods. And that's exactly what your podcast is. It is, as you call it, the amateur's guide to world events. But I started listening when you posted an episode on Twitter about the Tulsa massacre. Honestly, I hadn't heard of it before. And your episodes are just incredibly and impeccably researched. And your delivery on all your different topics is crystal clear. It's fun to listen to. And I don't listen to a ton of podcasts just because I don't have time, but a lot of them also that I've gone through and kind of listened to, I can't, as we've talked about, like it's harder for me to listen to just banter rather than people having something to say. And that's one thing I really value about your podcast.
Well, I appreciate the compliments. Thank you. I don't really even know how to take them these days. People say nice things about my show and I go, I assume you're telling me the truth.
Well, no, I mean, this is not like an arena that you would BS in. You're really good at what you do. And what I appreciate, especially about this last episode that we're going to talk a little bit about today, is when you take a really big topic and you have this ability to distill it down, talk about some major bullet points, and there's like enough room in it to reflect and ask questions.
Yeah, and that's I guess that's sort of the approach I try to take with each episode is, the whole premise of the show for me is that everything that I learn, I'm learning too, right? Like every topic is not something I was an expert on or I knew a ton about to begin with. I choose it, I research it, I try to put something together, and the listener is sort of learning what I just learned as well. So we're sort of on the same level really by the end of the show. So it's just about that approach of, I come in with an open mind and a general idea of what I want to find out. And then I try to put it together in a way that hopefully the listeners kind of experience what I just sort of went through in researching and writing the episode.
So the first time I reached out to you was after you had revealed a personal story about the police. I emailed you because I felt so compelled. You you opened your episode by talking about how your experiences as a white man with the police had always been kind of funny. And
Yeah.
I was so moved by that, like brutal honesty, because I have had the same experiences with the police. And as this whole Black Lives Matter movement has taken hold of our country, you know, it really, your way of telling that story really deeply resonated with me. And so I reached out to you and told you that I thought it was great. And then I just kind of started thinking I would really like to get to know who this person is. And then you published your episode about Amazon. And
yes,
I am in Seattle. Amazon is literally in my backyard. I texted you a photo yesterday of the first Amazon store was at a mall that's very close to my house. It is a company that I use almost daily. And now that there is a brick and mortar store, they accept returns. It's like life-changing. But
right.
They are in and out of the news.
I was very amazed by that.
Yeah.
I still have not seen a brick and mortar Amazon store. And I think I said to you when you sent that picture to me was, that's kind of amazing that they revolutionized the ability to buy anything online. And now they're opening, you know, actual brick and mortar stores in person. And I thought it's kind of strange that it's the opposite of what they made their living off of. So that really amazed me to actually see one in a picture like that.
Well, and also they've revolutionized the return process because you can order anything you want and some things you can't return. But if you want to return it, you click a box on your return receipt online and they send you a QR code, and all you do is you walk in, show your phone, they click the QR code, take the merch, and you're done. And so I was super curious to listen to your episode about Amazon. It was actually a really refreshing change, but it also got me thinking a lot about a few things and I kind of want to go through a few things with you. I want
Sure.
you to like give us the Cliff's Notes version of your Amazon podcast, even though I want everybody to go listen to it. Well, actually, before we go into Amazon, I want to kind of get into Dan Felton. I want to hear a little bit about your background, where you come from, and why you decided to start your podcast and educate us all on these fascinating topics.
Sure. I get asked that question, and I always kind of don't really feel like I have a great answer. You know, I'm pretty run of the mill as you know, most things go. I know there's a lot of people in the podcast community who are, you know, experts on certain topics or have, you know, been in media or journalism and all that stuff. And I mean, for anybody out there who wonders who I am about as regular gets. You know, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, which is the biggest city in the country. It's 4 or 5 million people. You know, it's a big, diverse, cultured, artistic city. It's a wonderful place to grow up, and it's a wonderful place to live. I've spent the last 10 years of my life living a couple hours down the road in London, Ontario, which is a bit of a smaller city, but again, it's a beautiful place. I went to school here in London. I went to a pretty good university, but I was always a terrible student. I was a very unfocused high school kid. I got into the school I went to by what I guess looking back was probably blind luck, really. And, you know, I sort of squandered sort of my time at university too.
There's so many of us with that story. That's how I feel in many ways. Like I look back now and I'm like, I don't even know how I got into that school. And I certainly did not take full advantage of it.
Yeah, that's how I feel too, especially now. I mean, to sit around every episode, I write them in full, you know, and they're about 7,000 or 8,000 words. So every 2 weeks, or I guess if you want to say every month, I'm writing somewhere between 15 and 20,000 words. And yet when I was in college and it actually mattered and it actually counted for something, I couldn't be motivated to do a whole lot of anything. So in terms of starting a podcast and doing this kind of stuff, it was really a result of just personal growth in general, right? I got out of university and I got thrown into the real world, you know, finding a job and paying all the bills and paying the student debts and all that stuff. It sort of makes you grow up. But, you know, one thing I think we talked about the other day, which was, you know, for a long time, I was one of those people from this generation. You know, I'm 28. I'm actually turning 29 tomorrow.
Happy birthday, you teeny tiny little baby.
I'm used to hearing that, but thank you. But I always felt like, people of my generation, we grew up with the internet. And I think there's sometimes this thing that people like us, people of my age do where, you read a lot of stuff on the internet and you think that you're well informed. I think that's a bit of a trap. A lot of times, a lot of the information you get is very surface level. It's very basic. It's a lot of headlines and a lot of, things that can fit into a tweet. And a story I tell sometimes is that, I never read a lot of books and I never really sought real sort of in-depth knowledge on my own time. And then actually after Donald Trump got elected, I remember having a moment where I thought, maybe I really got to try to learn some stuff, some real genuine, in-depth information and try to grow as a person. Because I don't think I'm as smart as I think I am. So after a couple of years of doing that and starting to read a lot of news and starting to try to sort of expand my horizons, I started to realize I didn't really have any outlet for all this stuff. And then right around the same time, I started listening to podcasts for the first time. And I guess like a lot of people, I thought, hey, this is something I think I can do. I couldn't think of an idea for a show. So my girlfriend said to me at the time, she went, why don't you just do a show where you talk about the things you read in the news and, and books and all that stuff. And that seemed to be the best idea I could come up with, especially doing a show purely solo. And I just sort of ran with it from there. And, here I am, a year and a half later, and it sort of evolved into something that I think is consistent enough to keep making.
I completely agree with you. And I think it bears noting that you are an extraordinary writer. And I can't believe this has not manifested in your life before, but your writing is wonderful and approachable and understandable. And it's one of the reasons why I really, really enjoy listening to your podcast.
Well, again, thank you. I appreciate the sentiments and all that. I guess I get that from my dad. My dad is actually a writer. He wrote for his entire life. My brother's a writer too. So I guess it was maybe kind of always there. And I just hadn't really ever explored that. And once I started writing a little bit, it did feel a little bit natural. I did feel like it was something I could do a little bit more. And of course, again, a year and a half later and tens of thousands of words and pages, it's a skill. Eventually you start to develop a little bit of a style and a process to write things. So I guess maybe I always had it in me. I just didn't really access that sort of part of my DNA, I guess is a way to think of it. But hopefully it's the right fit now.
Well, for me it is. And so thank you. Don't stop doing it because I'm learning a lot.
I'll keep going.
I'm speaking with Dan Felton. We're going to take a quick break. I'm so excited to welcome the second sponsor for Right in Front of My Face Season 2, Tracy Erickson from Compass Real Estate. Tracy, there are, I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of real estate agents in the world. And I would like you to tell people about why they should choose you.
Well, I would say I'm a market expert. I truly do understand what it takes to sell a home for the highest price. And of course, I understand for my buyers what it takes to compete in this crazy Seattle market.
Which is not easy.
No. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm a relationship person. I've worked really hard to build relationships with different agents and other realtors in the Seattle area. And I feel like that goes a really long way when one of my clients is making an offer on, another agent's listing, or they're making an offer on one of my clients' listings. I make it a priority to play nice in the sandbox. And that goes a long way.
I can relate because my priority in the interviews that I find and the stories that I'm helping tell, I tend to listen more than I talk.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with your philosophy as an agent?
Well, I just think that's a life lesson, but
I'm still learning.
Oh gosh. Well, I treat all of my clients like they're friends or family. This just isn't a transaction to me. This is a relationship. And when the transaction ends, our relationship doesn't. For most people, this is the biggest transaction of their life, and they're going to experience every range of emotion, from excited to stressed to happy to sad. And I am there with them every step of the way.
Tracy, I appreciate your philosophy and your outlook and your authenticity. And thank you very much for your support of Right in Front of My Face.
Yeah.
Tell people where they can find you.
Well, my phone number is 206-251-6351. You can also jump onto the Compass website, compass.com, and type my name in, Tracy Erickson, and find me there. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Tracy Erickson Homes.
And I would highly recommend that area because her stories are wonderful.
Thank you.
We are back with Dan Felton from Assorted Goods podcast. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you also is because you're podcasting and researching some very American topics as a Canadian. And I think that's really interesting.
Well, I think sometimes, people in America tend to forget. And I also remember, like my lens up here and living in Canada, I only sort of understand the world through the sort of perception that I have. So I tend to forget that Americans don't really have a good idea of what the sort of media sphere is up here. So like so much of American news and politics and all that stuff trickles right up here to us, where, we're neighbors. We hear all the conversations going on next door. We're a part of that dialogue. And a lot of times, a lot of the sort of political norms and cultural norms sort of seep across the border. We have a lot of the similar tendencies up here in Canada. And growing up, I guess I got very into American politics. And that's thanks to things like The Daily Show was a show I watched a lot growing up when I was in, a middle schooler and a high schooler. That was sort of a nice, light way, comedic way to get you into American news. And then as I got older, and obviously considering the last 3 or 4 years of American politics, it's been easier to sort of get into that and follow it closely. So I guess I've always had a fascination with American topics. I admit I am much less educated on Canadian politics and history and news than I should be. And that's something I really need to work on. But I guess I've got a bit of a desire to know more. I find American history very interesting. I find American politics very interesting. And I guess it's just sort of been unavoidable. It's a topic of interest. And I always say that, as American culture and society goes, I think so does the rest of the world quite often. And a lot of trends there don't just trickle into Canada, but I think across the globe. So keeping up with American culture and politics and society is it's a bit of a way to kind of get an idea of how other things are going to go as a result.
Interesting. So tell me how you landed on Amazon as a research topic.
Well, I had a suggestion from somebody a little while ago. Every now and then on Twitter and stuff like that, I throw it out there to see if there's any takers where I say, if you have any ideas in your head or something that's been rattling around, throw it out to me. I have like a little box that I've started to throw little shreds of paper in with a couple words on it or an idea, something that if I'm stuck, I can reach in and grab it and go, oh, maybe there's something here. So somebody a little while ago threw something out there and said, what about, do you know anything about Jeff Bezos? And do you know anything about his early life? And I thought, no, I don't. So I kind of started from there, which was just a little curiosity of where Jeff Bezos came from. How did he start this company? Was he just a regular guy? And then from there, I realized that, maybe it would be a good idea for us to kind of get to know Amazon as a whole and where they came from and how they managed to go. I mean, this company formed in 1994. I'm older than Amazon, despite being, as you say, a baby. But it started to fascinate me a little bit to think like, all right, how did this company go from a garage to, $1 trillion powerhouse in a little over 2 decades? So it started from there, and then it kind of naturally flowed into this idea of getting to know where they came from and then sort of contrasting their problems and their shadier sides and all that. So it started with an idea of figuring out who Jeff Bezos was, and then I thought, well, then why don't I just do the whole company and do both of them at the same time? And it turned into a big episode that went way longer than I thought it would.
Well, it's interesting. Living in Seattle, I feel like I drive by Amazon headquarters all the time. I see their spheres. They are a part of our everyday vernacular. My mom belongs to a private club on the east side of our city. Oh, well, it's another city called Bellevue, but we were standing on the front steps of her club, just kind of chatting before I was leaving dinner. She was staying behind with some friends, and we're talking. It's just the two of us on the entryway to her club, and this guy walks up. He's bald. He just looks pretty normal, but he comes up behind us, and I give him like a frat boy head nod. I'm like, hi, with a check. And it dawned on me as he walked by that was Jeff Bezos as the door shut. And I just looked at my mom and I'm like, I just gave a head nod to the richest man in the world, didn't I? And she was like, you just did. And I was like, oh my God. I felt like such an idiot. We see him. He is a figure here. And I think sometimes it's easy to not really analyze the business. And I do feel like I have to tread a little bit lightly here because I know a lot of people that work for Amazon. I'm not too interested in knocking it necessarily. God knows I use this company. But your podcast brought up some things that I had never thought about before in terms of, are we comfortable with this company being this size? Are we, and it wasn't, you didn't knock it, but it was very, very thought-provoking.
Well, that's sort of the thing. I guess you asked me before if I could give a brief sort of synopsis of the episode. And again, I didn't set out, and I think I said this in the episode, I didn't set out to disparage the company, right? And although I do admit I'm naturally inclined to not be a fan of, a billionaire or trillionaire sort of class like that, I guess that's just how I was raised. My dad was a person who instilled sort of values of anti-monopoly and sort of anti-giant companies. He was a person who sort of taught, me and my siblings growing up that there's inherent problems with sort of that endless chase for never-ending wealth. So I guess I was naturally inclined to be a little skeptical, but I didn't want to go into that episode like looking to find a way to slam them. And in the end, I didn't want to just walk away from it and be like, aren't they so terrible? Like, don't you agree they're terrible? Because to me, it's not really about that. To me, it's about trying to convince people that with that level of wealth comes a level of power and comes a level of influence, right? It's undeniable now that Jeff Bezos and Amazon are capable of, making governments who write our laws jump through hoops, like the whole second headquarters thing where they, had everybody sort of do literally that, jump through hoops and give these proposals of tax breaks and all this stuff so he can, I guess, bless their cities with high paying jobs and all that stuff. And it sort of made me think, like, is that something that we're comfortable with, where the power is in the hands of, a profit center like Amazon? So I didn't really approach the episode from that sense of trying to make them look bad or trying to make them, seem evil or something like that. So if anybody who hears this is wondering, that's not really my intent. It was more sort of to get people thinking about the idea of, shouldn't we demand more or demand better of somebody who has this much wealth and influence, right? If a company can sway government, then you think, can't they use that power for good, I guess? And maybe that's a little naive, and maybe that's a little,
Canadian?
again, I'm in my 20s. Yeah, it's a little Canadian, I guess, That is sort of where I came from, where I thought, someone like, say, Henry Ford, right? He, for all his flaws, and he was a flawed business mogul in his own right, but he standardized the 5-day work week. And now we have weekends, and it's a lot of that's to be attributed to him. And you think, there's a lot of labor issues with Amazon. There's a lot of issues with the warehouses and, underpaid and overworked employees and all that you think, can't there be some sort of hope that this guy and the company that he owns would sort of use that ability and that power to influence change? Like, it feels like Amazon could set a standard of raising the minimum wage nationally if they pressured the right people. But it feels more like they spend a lot of their influence trying to make sure unions don't get formed, which is, something that I also don't agree with. So I guess it's sort of, again, I'm not trying to make Amazon seem like the evil empire, but I guess I'm sort of hoping to sway people to think that maybe we should hold them to a higher standard. I think is maybe the best way I can put that.
Well, I think your point is interesting. And the part for me, going back a little bit to how it was formed, through a very thorough knowledge of tax codes, somewhat brilliantly executed.
Yes.
Where it's been like a topic of conversation where you can't fault a company for using tax loopholes, right? Like, it's just sort of unfortunate, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that piece was really interesting too.
Yeah, and that was one of the more interesting things I learned about them when I was researching the company a bit, was how they went from being, in a garage selling books to being worth multi-billion dollar, stock valuations and all that in just 5 years, was off the back of this Supreme Court ruling that had been made 2 years before they even formed in 92 that said, online retailers aren't subject to the same taxes that a brick and mortar store would be, the, state sales tax, for example, and how, that gives such an edge to them in those early years where they were selling products where people thought, hey, you can get it delivered to my house and I don't have to pay sales tax. That's awesome. So sort of over the course of 25 years, they've managed to use, obviously, yes, legal tax codes, right? That, you can't, again, fault them if if legislatures write the laws that way and the companies just follow that code, that you kind of can't fault them. But at the same time, they sort of use those tax loopholes and, understanding the codes very well to sort of leverage their business and allowing it to grow. And it's, again, I don't want to necessarily just come out in the sense of being like, well, that's so wrong of them, because any one of us in our lives, if we could find a tax break for ourselves,
right,
we're going to use it, right? And if you're trying to build a massive company, you're going to use it. But again, now it's at the point where it's like, your company's one of the 4 companies in America worth over $1 trillion. Aren't we past the point of growth and expansion and to the point of, maybe it's time to start giving back to the society and to the country, really, that allowed you to become so big in the first place? And I think that's a common point a lot of people make these days is, sure, you don't have to pay the taxes, but, you live in America. You're an American. Like you said, you can pass the guy on the street and give him a head nod. He's a citizen like everybody else. Don't you want them to give back to the society a little more than just simply, opening warehouses and employing people? As good as that is, people making $15 an hour in a warehouse, that doesn't build roads, that doesn't fund public schools, that doesn't fund healthcare. So much wealth going through one company. There's a big hole in sort of government budgets and public funding for a lot of things, because billions of dollars are being brought in by profits, but the tax codes allow them to avoid paying back into the system and back into the society that sort of allowed them to get so big in the first place. So I guess that was sort of my appeal on that front too. It's amazing they were able to do it. And he clearly, Bezos is a guy who clearly understands finance brilliantly. He was a Wall Street executive at a young age, but it's also at the same point, like, isn't that enough? And isn't it time to sort of come back around to help lift the country as a whole up? I guess that's my sort of train of thought on that.
Well, I think it's a huge criticism of Amazon locally. It's funny, my last interview I'd like over prepared for, and then this one I kind of wanted you to educate me about it. So I didn't do as much prep as I usually do. But the one thing that I did find and that we did talk about in our pre-production call is that he is one of the richest people in the world, and the only American in the world's 5 richest people who hasn't signed the Giving Pledge. Right. And everybody that signs this pledge promises to give away more than half their wealth during their lifetime. Mackenzie Bezos signed it, but Jeff didn't. And I find that fascinating. And, I was kind of looking, it's not like he hasn't done anything. Their family has contributed millions to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. He's done a lot for homelessness. So it's not nothing, but it's certainly not what other billionaires are doing.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair criticism, and I'm not going to be specific, so don't quote me on this one. But I know there's been maybe during the wildfires or something like that, if I remember, he has made donations. I can't remember. I know he's made a few, but I can't remember exactly what the causes were. I'm a little foggy on that, but he always gets criticized afterwards because people always go, oh, if he donates $1 million, that's like me, donating a cup of coffee, like it's that same equivalent. And again, I don't want to sit here. I don't know the man and I don't know his mind, right? Obviously, and despite researching a topic, I can never really know the person. But, the most interesting thing about Jeff Bezos when I was researching him was the early clips of him in the late 90s when he's still this humble billionaire who drives his old Honda and, he works in an office with a creaky old desk. And it's all that sort of, that humble billionaire beginnings that, he sticks to his sort of, regular things, why get rid of my car if it still works well and that kind of stuff. And yet now here we are a couple decades later, And, the persona outwards now is the only way I think I can describe it sometimes is it's sort of like James Bond villain looking, right? It's the tuxedo and, the nice tan he's got, and he wants to go to space and he wants to do all this stuff. And I'm like, that's great. But at the same time, someone's ambition sometimes worries me because you think, you may think you're doing something for the greater good, but, who gets left behind? And I guess that was part of my episode was in this sort of hunt to go to the moon and to build, mass, networks of cloud computing and all that. And, be able to revolutionize retail like he has across the globe and deliver packages to your door in the blink of an eye. Who's being left behind? Are the workers being left behind? Are they paying their taxes fairly? There's just, I'm a person who thinks that you always got to be able to ask questions about things like that. And you have to be able to take a deeper look at it because there may be things hiding behind the scenes that are worth noticing and worth asking questions about.
Well, one thing you asked a question about was why people need 2-day shipping. And I thought, how dare you, sir? Because that is spoken. That is spoken from a man that has no children yet because you are 29 years old.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And I'll tell you a story actually is, not everything on Amazon is shipped from them, right? They, I did talk about this in episode 2 is that they partner with small businesses, right, to connect customers with, products that otherwise wouldn't be found, right? So I ordered a book back in, I think, early April, and I guess maybe the COVID situation played into this as well. But I remember I ordered this book from a small bookstore off Amazon, and it popped up at the end, and it said, "Oh, you should expect to get this in about 6 weeks." And I thought, 6 weeks? Like, you're telling me I have to wait a month for this book? It's just a book. What do you mean, a month? It blew my mind. And then at the same time, I thought, well, maybe this is a lesson in patience or something for me, right? Like everything's supposed to show up in a week or even 2 days. And here I am, the thing's telling me, you might get this in May, you might get it early June. And I'm thinking, wow, but wait, isn't that how it used to be? Isn't that normal? So
it did. And it has created a culture where you can get groceries. I mean, it's saved a lot of people too.
Yeah.
At this point, it's an essential service for sure. But in looking at things that have changed the world, Amazon is easily top 5.
Sure.
Changed the way we look at shipping, changed the way, and it has brought a lot of jobs. And with that, concerns about unions, not wanting to unionize. Now, I don't have an opinion on that because I am so unresearched, frankly. So I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to have an opinion. But you do sort of look at a company really aggressively fighting that action. And like you said, you kind of can't help but ask questions about it, which I don't think is inherently bad.
Yeah. And in terms of the union stuff, I mean, historically speaking, from what I understand, it's very cyclical. So, unions will become very popular at certain points of history, and then they sort of fade away when conditions kind of become more, I guess, acceptable and, wages are fair. People flock to unions when conditions are poor. Wages aren't keeping up with standards of living and all that. So it's not surprising that there's big union movements happening, not just in Amazon, but in a lot of industries all over the globe right now, because, we live in a moment of inequality. There's a great gap between, I guess, to use sort of a cliche term, the haves and the have-nots, right? So historically speaking, this makes sense that right now there would be a big push for unionization in a lot of industries, and especially at Amazon. It's hard for people who work in those warehouses to ignore the stories they hear from other locations, right? It's hard to, right. I imagine it's hard to work in a warehouse and think, hey, somebody who does the same job died in a warehouse, and their body was left on the floor for a half an hour while everyone else was told to keep working. It's those kinds of stories, these days you can hear any news from anywhere. So if you hear that, it gets in your head. And then if you have days where you're working extra hard and you're in pain, or you feel like you're being taken advantage of, or you're under unreasonable pressure, that sentiment can build up into union efforts. And it's unsurprising that a company so big as Amazon would try to squash that. Every company in history has, pretty much. So it's not a topic that I'm an expert on either, but just from the surface, it's not surprising that it's a debate being had, and Amazon's at the center of it because, like you said, they employ hundreds of thousands of people. So it's only natural that they're going to be thrown into the mix of that.
We're going to take a quick break. I am sitting here with John Gruss from Element Mortgage. Talk to me about mortgages.
Yes, crazy. It is an absolutely crazy market out there. If you've been paying attention to anything in the news, you've heard that interest rates are at historically low levels. That is true. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the two major government entities, have reported that the interest rates currently are at the lowest level they have ever seen. So it's definitely an exciting time in the industry right now for us.
So I've owned a house for 16 years and I still don't fully understand the mortgage business.
Not something you do every day. That's okay.
It's not. So tell me a little bit about where you're licensed to do business and who can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. We're actually licensed in 48 states through our parent company, which is American Pacific Mortgage. Our brand, Element Mortgage, we have 4 locations based in Washington, California, Colorado, and Hawaii. So in terms of working directly with us, that's our footprint. But if you're in any of the other 48 states, we have the ability to assist.
So the line that always gets me is whatever you've got, we've got you. Tell me a little bit about the philosophy behind Element Mortgage.
Really, it's about focusing on the consumer and their needs and providing options. You know, you hear about refinancing right now. Well, what does that mean? Should I refinance? I'm already maybe a few years into my loan. Does it make sense? With where interest rates are today, it absolutely is worth it to explore your options. And that's what we provide. We provide an expert element. That's part of our business. We're local, so we know what's going on in the local market area. And again, as you mentioned, the human element. It's a major part of this. Again, you don't buy or refinance a home very often. So it is important to have a team that's behind you that you can trust when going through a major transaction like this.
Thank you so much for your support of Right in Front of My Face.
My pleasure.
And if anybody needs John, his information will be up in the show notes. And how do they get in touch with you, John?
Easy. Give me a call, 206-954-4787, or hit our website, elementmortgage.com. John Gruss, NMLS number 1108421. Element Mortgage is a division of American Pacific Mortgage, NMLS number 1850, equal housing opportunity.
We are back with Dan Felton from Assorted Goods Podcast. I'm curious from your Canadian perspective. I mean, we've talked about this concept of American individualism, and I think our president embodies that in a way that I'm not sure we've seen from the U.S. so obviously. I feel comfortable saying that. I don't think we've had such an obvious example of American individualism. And I think being in a pandemic certainly highlights how little our administration really cares about the individual people and how much they care about their own gain and reelection. I think the same thing could potentially be said for the leadership of Amazon, because we haven't obviously seen a huge philanthropic effort. We haven't seen obvious support of warehouse workers. That comment could probably get me in trouble, but
well, you wouldn't necessarily be wrong on that front. They have had issues since the start of COVID about keeping up with the standards that other businesses are having to follow. And, you know, the problem is, right, is we say about things like 2-day shipping, is they offer services that are they can't be matched. There's almost, I don't think there's any retail in the world who can move products with such efficiency and speed and on such a huge scale. So when you have something like COVID like this, it's hard because, again, like you said, nobody's going out anymore. Everyone's buying online. And when they're buying online, they're mostly buying from Amazon. But then that just increases the demand. That increases the pressure for workers to package and scan and to get the products out. So it really conflicts. And I think, not to, hindsight obviously is one thing, but it would have maybe been nice to see Amazon kind of come out and say, look, we're going to have to prioritize. And I think they did, if I remember, we're going to have to prioritize necessities. And also, you're probably not going to get your packages in 2 days or 3 days.
Right.
Like, we're all in this together. And if people are going to be impatient, then it's going to create that environment where workers are being worked extra hard. And now on top of that, there's this unsafe health crisis going on, right? Amazon has sort of created the expectation of I don't need to be patient to wait for something to show up at my house. But at the same time, it conflicts with public health guidelines. It's sort of an interesting way to see this happen, right? There's that they've created this beast, and now they sort of can't wrangle it in a time where we really need it to be, right? And to be fair, again, like, we, the consumers, are also a little to blame because we've gotten so used to it.
Right.
We've gotten so used to, we've gotten used to this idea that, like, I click a button and it shows up in 2 days, and just like that. And now it's like, it's not just the company, it is also a little bit on the consumer to learn to sort of put aside that expectation. And, like, you don't need everything you order to be there in the blink of an eye, do you? Like, maybe that's a question we all need to ask ourselves as well.
Well, I'm wondering too if it's not going to be kind of the dawn of a new day for Amazon, because I think homelessness and climate change seem to emerge as the two causes that are near and dear to Bezos' heart. And Amazon did just do a pretty big naming rights deal for an arena in Seattle, and they are not calling it the Amazon Arena. They're calling it the Climate Change Arena, and the goal is that it'll be at a net zero carbon footprint. So I think things like that will start to happen, and that's like you throw a bone to the city and you're going to make a reasonable effort. And so I think things like that will happen. But, Bezos is also a guy who is really involved in the day-to-day operations of Amazon. And it's interesting. He's just an interesting leader.
And I think the interesting thing about, what you were saying before about, the sort of the American individualism is that, in Canada, we have sort of the same thing. We kind of have a billionaire class. There's a group of people here who hold a significant amount of wealth. We're not that different. The difference is sort of the celebrity status of CEOs and billionaires in America. Americans seem to have this thing where they really fawn over wealth, right? And celebrity and wealth are very intertwined. I think Donald Trump is sort of the pinnacle of that. Really, he's looking at his records in history. He's not as wealthy as he says he is, but the illusion of wealth has been enough to sort of prop up his celebrity for years, and that same concept sort of extends to the truly wealthy people like Jeff Bezos or somebody like Elon Musk, right? Where their persona is part of the business, right? Their celebrity status as sort of the head of a major company is a big part of their role in American society. And, we don't really have that here in Canada. We don't really know our billionaires, right? Which in some ways is inherently a little more dangerous, because it's better to be able to name Jeff Bezos and call him out and hold him accountable directly than it is to not be really aware of who he is at all, right?
But you wonder, is that what's happening? Like, just because I can throw him a head nod and know who he is, that doesn't necessarily mean that even the government has the ability to go back and say, Bezos, we really need you to start paying taxes.
Yeah. And well, that's true. And I guess you're right. It doesn't really change anything because, again, a good example is Elon Musk. In the last couple of months, there was the issue he had in California where he was saying that, if the state of California imposes regulations on him, he's going to pack up his factory and move it to a different state, which sort of draws back to what I was saying before of, are we comfortable with the idea that a company has that kind of power, right? Sure, every business is free to do what they want. Every business can open and close stores if they see fit. But is it something we're okay with to think that, a billionaire who spends a lot of their time, we do know that these guys spend a lot of the time trying to make sure that the stock valuation stays up, right? And stocks are temperamental. They can move in an instant with the wrong quote or the wrong statement or bad news. So are we okay with people who are so focused on image to maintain their valuations, having that ability to say to a government, change your laws for me or I'm leaving, is that the kind of power dynamic we're okay with? In America, business is such a, it's so paramount, right? People are all about being able to, in America, you can start a business and you can do anything, but are we okay with the idea that power should rest in a business owner's hands more than elected officials? We don't elect CEOs, but if they're influencing legislation, isn't that a bit of an issue to people that somebody who has no accountability to the public is able to tell a state or a federal government, change your laws for me or else, right?
Yeah, someone who's beholden maybe to the public only through shareholders.
Right.
Who have a complete interest in how that plays out. It's an incredibly interesting topic, and listening to your thought process around it, kind of from the outside looking in, it is really, really interesting. And I think it's that question of, are we comfortable with this? Because I think sometimes we forget this implicit agreement that we have with companies that we use, that we're just not going to ask any questions because we really just like the convenience of it. This made me think a lot as I am still receiving Amazon packages on my porch. I have one scheduled to come tomorrow. I am using this. It did give me pause to be like, wow. I mean, this is an incredible amount of power that we, the consumers, have given this one person. And I loved what you said when you were writing your script for the show, when you typed in the word trillionaire and it's not even a recognized word in Microsoft Office spell check.
Yeah. It gave me the spell check thing on that. But billionaire was fine, but trillionaire, I guess, whatever version of Microsoft Word I'm using, they had not yet thought that was a word that would be commonly used, and yet we're on the brink of it. But it's sort of amazing, though, and I guess one thing I've really thought about lately is that in terms of Amazon, they're not the first people where we have to ask those questions, those moral questions of, are we okay with it? We've seen it before, like the clothing industry is a good example, right? Since the 90s, there's been all those controversies about, Gap and like Old Navy and stuff like that, and overseas child labor and all that. And it's like, it's always the same. It always boils down to the same thing, right? You get something that you like, right? People like cheap clothes that they can buy and wear out as much as they want. People like, Nike shoes, and people like iPhones. We all like the things that companies make, but we also simultaneously have to overlook that sort of dark reality to it, that it was made or there was something attached or something behind the scenes that's uncomfortable. People, when we order off Amazon, and don't get me wrong, I do it too. It's hard to ignore that they give me access to everything in the world, right? But there is always sort of this dark side of it where we have to think like, at what cost, right?
Right.
But time and time again, we kind of find that most people are kind of okay with it, right? And so maybe this, maybe I'm just the next generation of putting it out there of saying, can we think about this a little bit? And maybe it's a futile effort, but, still worth asking the question, right?
It's never a futile effort. It's never a futile effort to raise your hand and be like, I think this bears repeating, and I think I just want to point this out. Because this is something, I mean, it is a big deal. And I think it's your point too. It's not even necessarily the wealth. It's the incredible power that comes behind it when a company says, right, okay, cities, we're going to start a bidding war. And, the irony of it is a lot of the cities were like, nah, we're good. Like there's a price to pay that comes with Amazon and gentrification and unaffordable housing and inequity that we actually don't want.
Right. Yeah. And some of the cities and states I remember pretty much said that. They put a proposal to them, and then Amazon went, yeah, that's not good enough. And they went, okay, but that was as far as we were willing to go. And we're not going to, but of course they managed to whittle it down to a few places where they were comfortable with giving big tax breaks, which is, again, that was one of the things that I think was really unsettling about that was, I don't know the ins and outs of their account. Right? I don't know the ins and outs of their books. So I can't really know for sure. But when you're one of the four or five richest companies in the world and you're continuously growing and your growth is expected to continue, it does seem a little strange to say to somewhere, give us a tax break so we can continuously do that. And to draw back what you said before, yeah, they're not accountable. CEOs and executives aren't accountable to the voting public like a government would be. they're accountable to their shareholders, but shareholders have an interest, right?
Right.
It's shareholders kind of can turn the blind eye as long as their stock goes up, right? But I guess again, it for me, it just keeps coming back to the point which is, how big does the stock have to get, right? Is there a limit? Is there a point where, it's too much? But it's really not, because you see people all the time when they talk about investing, right? An amateur investor, people who want to get into the market, they say, oh, buy a stock like Apple or Amazon. Why? Because they're always growing and they're continuously growing. So then no matter who gets into the company, if you buy one share of Amazon for whatever it is now, like $1,500 or something, I can't even remember. But if you buy one share, then your interest is now in seeing that grow. And
Right.
that grows by good profit margin, which helps when you get tax breaks. And it's like the way it sort of all pieces together and works and feeds into itself. It's really, I guess, like you said, it's eye-opening, right? When you can look at it piece by piece, but when you kind of see the whole picture come together, you think, is this really the right way to be doing things? And, again, I'm a naive 20-something, so I'm asking big questions with no real answer.
No, Dan, you're the future. This is the thing. Like, it is that generation. It's your generation and younger that's going to come in and be like, I don't know. I think this is enough. I mean, it raises a good question. And again, I'm not convinced this is uniquely American.
It's not just American, and it's not just Amazon either. And that sort of was one thing I tried to make clear in that episode was I'm not singling them out to pick on them. They're just the most visible example, right? Like there are issues at other companies too. Facebook has issues and Google has issues and, of labor and equality and fairness and all that. All these companies do. I just think Amazon is an easy target, right? They're so upfront and out there that, and they're also one of the biggest companies in the world. It's easy to pick them apart a little bit, but also, I mean, when you're on the top of the mountain, everybody's going to be gunning for you, right? And picking you apart and finding ways to sort of break you down like that. So, and in truth, I believe that everything comes back to balance. What I was saying before about how unions in history kind of come and go, it's a balance thing, right? When wages and stuff, conditions get out of hand, unions come up, and then that tends to force, equality back to more towards the middle line. And then, when that happens, people kind of don't want them anymore, but then that opens the door up for exploitation again. Right. I kind of believe the same thing with Amazon and these companies. They can't grow forever because sooner or later the levee's got to break, right? There are already problems with a company being that big, and then as time goes on, there's going to come a point where something will happen in the market or something will happen in the labor force. Something will force balance back into it, right? Everything kind of regresses to the mean eventually. Takes a long time, but
takes a while.
I that's sort of how I feel about it. Is that, and maybe that's part of the conversation I want to have, is how do we sort of nudge them back towards the middle and back towards sort of fairness and even-keeled business practices?
Well, again, so much of it does stem from leadership. And when does social responsibility kind of come with this huge amount of power? Yeah.
And somebody like Jeff Bezos, I was saying before that his early clips of his career, right? He's such a humble billionaire, right? Again, now he seems sort of like, again, Bond villainy, as I like to call them, is he looks almost like something out of a classic action movie, the wealthy billionaire with the rocket ship to the moon or something like that, something ridiculous. And you think, he's a human being too. He's gone through phases in his life and he's changed, in 25 years of owning this company. And he very likely could change again. He could grow and have an epiphany. Like you said, he's about climate change now. He's about fighting that. And you think, maybe in 5 years he will change his tune. And then obviously he's going to have issues with, his shareholders and his board of directors and all that, because that will change the business and all that. But he's a person, and I imagine he'll change, and maybe the general public and the general consensus can help sort of sway him or convince him to come back to that sort of level of fairness, right? And if he listens to this, I appeal to him to do so, but I'm sure he doesn't care what I think. So
it's an interesting question to think, does somebody even dream of becoming a trillionaire. Even as Amazon has gotten so successful, you wonder at some point if, there are lots of people at Amazon that make a lot of money and have accrued a lot of money in stock and all of this. And you just wonder if any of them sit back and think, I didn't even want this. Like, I've got enough. I've got what I need. Is this all worth it?
Well, I would guess, I guess from experience is the answer is probably no. I mean, it does seem that if somebody jumps into Amazon right now with a single share, they want that $2,000 investment or whatever it is now to grow. They don't want to lose money, right? And the people who hold stock in that, it's sort of this, again, it's sort of a monster. It's this beast that gets created through the markets where you build something, people get in, they want to make money, they seek profit, and then obviously, I mean, who wants to? I think a low percentage of people are people who look at what they have and go, "This is acceptable for me." Right. And I think that's also a bit of a cultural thing in America, too.
Yeah, it is. I just saw something on Twitter that made me laugh pretty hard where it was a quote, and it basically said, wasn't it nice that the guy that created MySpace just sold it for like $10 million and was retired and had a nice life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he wasn't meddling in elections.
He showed up in that thread on Twitter and was like, "Yep, I'm here. Like, just so you know."
Did he really?
He was like, yeah, I think he did. If I remember, I thought I saw him show up, and it was his verified account. And he said, "Yeah, don't worry. Like, I'm still alive and kicking." And yeah, he lives on a tropical island somewhere, just bumming it on the beach all day. And you think, yeah, he's a rare case, right?
Yes.
That's 1 out of 100. It seems like.
I know. I've talked about this with friends and my husband, where you're like, at what point do you just cash out and say, you know what? I've had a great run. I have made $200 billion.
Yeah.
I'm going to go solve some of the world's problems. And, we drive by the Gates Foundation. We drive by, Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, where so many benefactors in our city have generously tried to solve the world's problems. The Gates Foundation has this incredible sort of museum and visitor center where they show you what the Gates Foundation is doing. And a lot of their work now is revolving around toilets and sanitation. And there's such an active effort to make a difference in the world.
Strangely enough, the toilets in that work they do is actually something I believe I mentioned on my show once as a story that you're right. That's a massive global problem, right? We forget that like 1 billion people in the world don't even have anything that even resembles a toilet.
Yeah, and it's potable drinking water. I mean, it's to get clean water. And so you look at, curing malaria and all of these things that the Gates Foundation is very publicly doing. It's not hidden, and it's actually employed a lot of really brilliant people, and the work is very altruistic. And so when you have that example set against Amazon's example that we haven't seen a ton of, it's super interesting to just look at that juxtaposition.
Sure. Yeah. And again, not that we could, but not to bully Jeff Bezos, right? But he's not alone either. As much as there's sort of the celebrity class of billionaires in America, there's also the unknown class of billionaires in America.
Yep.
And they do much worse things than he does, right? He may be exceedingly wealthy and not give back as much as we would like, but he's not someone like, the Mercer family who invests heavily in political disruption, or, there's a whole bunch of people in America who use their wealth and power to do more deviant things societally and culturally. So it's not to pick on him. And again, like I said, he made changes too. He's only 56, 57 years old. That's pretty young, especially for someone without much money. He's probably going to live a long, healthy life with the kind of, healthcare and access he's got. So he's still got plenty of time.
Yeah, he'll get cryogenically frozen and then live another lifetime.
Sure. That's a whole other can of worms, I'm sure. But, that's the point, right? He very well could in later years turn his attention elsewhere. Maybe he still considers himself in the prime of his life where he's accumulating his wealth, I guess. We can never really get inside the mind of him. But again, it's just asking the questions and having the conversation so that it's not going unsaid.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I could talk about it all day, frankly, but it was really, really interesting to hear a Canadian point of view on a company that I don't think about very much and use virtually every single day.
Yeah. And so many of us do too, really. I'm guilty of it all the time. I think about needing to buy something, and the first thing I think is, I wonder if it's on Amazon, right? Because they sort of have a monopoly not only on the industry, but also a monopoly on our first thought, right? Like
100%.
sort of like Google. Like
Yep.
when you think about finding something on the internet, you don't think, well, should I Google it or Bing it or use something like DuckDuckGo or something like. Yeah, like they have sort of a monopoly on your first thought as well, which is another aspect of it that I guess is uncomfortable, but that's sort of a human thing, I guess, really.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time today. This was delightful as expected. I really, really look forward to what else you're going to serve on your podcast. I'm going to listen to them all, and I'm going to be so smart by the end of it.
Well, I appreciate it. And, again, I appreciate all the kind words and this has been a lot of fun to come on here. I'm happy to do it anytime. Again, any listeners out there want to, give a try. It's out there on every podcast feed you can find. Hopefully people listen and hopefully they find something valuable in it. And, I'll keep trying to make something make a quality production for people to enjoy, I guess. And yeah, so, again, thanks for having me on, and thanks for having a good conversation. This has been great.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something today. I know so many people who work for Amazon that I'm trying to remain nonpartisan, and odds are really good that I've been to the Amazon store more than once since recording this episode. But it is food for thought. If you have comments, please find me at In Front of My Face on Twitter, at Right In Front of My Face on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, please take a moment to ask another question, to get to know someone in person a little bit better, because we truly never know what's happening right in front of our face.